Let me just start with this announcement from the Attorney General. What did he say, and why did he feel the need to say it now?
Well, Brad, actually, can we step back a second and start with the fact that this is a week where things that don't happen happened all at once in quick succession, boom, 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 boom. So we had a former president. They never get searched by the FBI. Well, Donald Trump's place got searched. We had a former president who went ahead and pleaded the Fifth Amendment so he wouldn't incriminate himself in a civil investigation in New York. That never happens, and it went ahead and happened. And then in the midst of all of this.
Since I became Attorney General, I have made clear that the Department of Justice will speak through its court filings and its work.
You had the Attorney General go ahead and announce at a press conference that was hastily called that the Justice Department was going to court in a way that they never do, to ask a judge to unseal documents that are never unsealed.
The department filed the motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, the surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter.
Now, these documents ordinarily would come out in the course of a prosecution down the road, but now we're off to the races.
Hey, if Trump was subpoenaed for these documents that apparently the FBI was going around Mar-a-Lago looking for, how would this sort of new timeline that the Attorney General is offering, how would that shape our understanding of this? Like, why does that matter?
Oh, it matters in so many different ways.
We have learned tonight that it was a staff member at Mar-a-Lago who called Eric Trump, and Eric Trump who then called his father to tell him about the search.
So let's go back to Monday night. We hear about the search and raid at Mar-a-Lago. We heard that Trump was not home at the time, and then Trump quickly confirms it. And he's very, very critical of what was going on.
Saying in a statement, agents even broke into my safe, and claiming his home, quote, is currently under siege, raided and occupied by a large group of FBI agents.
And then almost immediately, the far right, the hard right, the really aggressive, pro-Trump, anti-Democrat world online immediately went back into their greatest hits.
The Biden administration, the Democrats are weaponizing the FBI, and it has to stop.
This is the deep state. They're going after Trump. This is civil war.
You know, like my shirt says, no one's coming, it's up to us. This is a we the people kind of thing.
I don't care if they kill me today. It's worth dying for. This country is giving me too much and my family.
The search warrant was authorized by a federal court upon the required finding of probable cause.
So the importance of what's developed and what Garland said yesterday is that this search was something that A, was not, taken on quickly and without thought. B, it was not done simply by rogue prosecutors and FBI agents. It was signed off by him personally, the chief law enforcement officer in the country. And on top of that, what we've now learned is that this is a ramp up, the way the law insists that it happens with a search. The first thing is a request for records. Excuse me, lawyers for Brad, lawyers for President Trump, we would like these records. That's the first step. The second step is subpoena, court order, but it's not aggressive, it's not invasive. It's basically something that's served on you, and it says, we want these documents, and they give you a list of 1 or a list of 10 or a list of 100, but we want these, please return them to this office on this date so we can review them. That's the next step. We now learned yesterday afternoon that that's precisely what happened with Trump. And then if the Justice Department, if the FBI does not get the records after a subpoena, then they can go to the court and ask for a search warrant and ask the judge to check what they're offering. They're saying, we need these records, we need them for this reason, and we're worried that if we don't go in with this type of aggressive mechanism, that the records could be taken, could be destroyed, could be missing.
So what are these records, John? Like if Trump was subpoenaed for them in the spring, and like you said, there was a court of law on its side saying you got to give these over, and they still don't think he's given them over, what do they think he's hiding?
Well, that is the issue. That is the core of what this is today. So when you go to the court and you ask for a search warrant, you both explain to the judge what it is you're looking for and where you want to search. And then you have to explain why you believe a crime has been committed. So Merrick Garland yesterday in his announcement and in the papers that were filed by the Justice Department in Florida, they're not planning or asking to release the affidavit that explains why they believe a crime may have been committed. That is To them, it's obviously a bridge too far. What they are asking to be released is the list of what they were seeking, the search warrant that says we're looking for this, 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 and this, and here's where we want to look for it. And then what's called the return, basically an inventory of we took X, Y, and Z. It's all very, very normal. All of those things would be normally occurring and normally filed in any federal investigation anywhere in the country. But in this case, what we're talking about are incredibly sensitive documents. According to ABC's reporting, we were able to confirm just last night that the documents are national security documents. They're labeled, quote unquote, special access, which means that it's material available and accessible only to people in the highest level of the government with the highest level of security clearances. And this is stuff that the feds wanted back and wanted back immediately. And they got a sense that Trump was just not complying, not prepared to comply with their requests.
Okay, so that's Merrick Garland. That's the subpoena, and that's everything there. Can we get back to what you were saying about the hard right and the conservative movement in this country? Can you help explain how intense that anger has become over the last few days?
It happens to be incredibly intense, and it's been intensifying. It started Monday night in the wake, in the immediate aftermath of the raid, as being a lot of different things, a lot of different types of anger, and the experts and law enforcement were watching it. By the time Tuesday morning starts to roll around and we get to Wednesday morning, it has built up into some real organized lines of thought.
We think it's abuse of power. I think that since he came down the escalator, it's been nothing but attacks for him.
And so among people who believe that there is a civil war coming and there should be a civil war and that the government is an occupational force, they saw this Monday night as almost a battle strike, the beginning. Let's go.
And it's time for we the people to get off the couch, shut down Netflix, put your phone down, get up, come outside, or you're not going to have a country left.
People are advocating for going after law enforcement officials. And we know that in the last few years, we have seen an incredibly large and troublingly growing number of acts of violence being committed against law enforcement officers. And so yesterday, just before we got the surprise announcement from Garland, we start seeing what's going on in Cincinnati. And all of a sudden, you have somebody who, in the middle of this environment this week, for reasons that are not yet known, but in the middle of this environment this week, somebody goes to an FBI office in Cincinnati and tries to gain access, and he's armed.
Yeah, and that confrontation finally came to a close. Hours later, the standoff ended in a hail of gunfire. That suspect in Cincinnati is now dead. But whether he was angry about that FBI search or not, a lot of experts fear this is just the beginning of even more violence. Josh Margolin, our chief investigative reporter. Thanks a lot.
Brad, thank you.
Next up on Start Here, the CDC says COVID is here to stay, and they've got some new recommendations for you to follow. We're back in a bit.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
You never know what you're going to get on this show. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yes, Whoopi!
Is this mic on? Can you hear me out there?
Behind the scenes is always a better show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's what people don't see during the commercial break.
Right, they don't.
What happened?
I had no idea really what I was getting myself into.
That day that we walked out, I treasured that day. I couldn't sit there.
You're doing good, Joy. You're doing good.
Oh, yeah, baby. It was crazy.
Behind the Table. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
America's #1 news, ABC News. most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
When the CDC announced big changes to its mask guidance, part of its rationale was you can't reliably keep people masking for years at a time. The way to earn people's trust is to let them take off their masks in lower risk areas for now, with the understanding you'd be asked to take more precautions if risk rose again. The only problem is that hasn't necessarily happened. COVID cases rose throughout the spring, they stayed high in the summer, now school is about to start again. Many cities have not reinstituted mandates, but yesterday the CDC came out with new guidance to perhaps make things simpler for local officials. ABC's Cheyenne Hazlett has been tracking all these decisions. Cheyenne, can you just walk me through this announcement yesterday?
So here's the big picture. We are living with this virus. We've gotten hospitalizations and deaths down a lot from where we've been during the pandemic, and we have widely available vaccines, boosters, treatments. So more and more, CDC is basically saying, hey, we got to get back to normal where we can.
After the tone, please state your name.
Cheyenne Hazlett, as a CDC scientist behind the new guidelines from yesterday, said on a call with reporters, the current conditions of this pandemic are very different from those of the last 2 years.
Vaccines and boosters are universally available and very effective at reducing serious illness.
That same scientist also mentioned that hospitalizations related to COVID were 4.6 times higher in unvaccinated adults than in those who have received the vaccine. We have treatment like Paxlovid, all the things you can do for yourself to stay healthy.
Our goal is to provide sustainable guidance that allows flexibility and ensures everyone has access to information to protect themselves and others.
So here's the deal. If you're out and about living your life and you find out that you got exposed to somebody with COVID, that is no longer a reason to go home and stay away from everyone. Now, if you're vaccinated and boosted, you're thinking, okay, I already don't need to do that because of the protection from my vaccine. But the difference is that's now the case regardless of your vaccination status. If you're not vaccinated and you have a run-in with a COVID positive person, you still don't have to quarantine. Monitor your symptoms. Wear a mask around other people for 10 days. Around day 5, after the exposure, take a test.
Oh, right, because it's not like the day after you talk to this person, you would be testing positive. It takes a few days.
Yeah, they want you to wait until day 5 and to monitor your symptoms. If you get symptoms before then, take a test sooner. Now, the other change that we saw from the guidance is about what to do if you do get COVID. If you're sick and isolating at home with COVID, the CDC still isn't recommending that you test negative as your ticket to re-entering the world, but now they are giving us guidance on what to do if you do want to test, which a lot of people do to ensure, that they're not contagious before they head back out.
Sure.
So CDC has said, here's how they'd do it.
CDC also recommends that people who have COVID-19 should stay home and isolate for at least 5 full days.
They'd wait those 5 days. If you're symptom-free, take a test. Now, if that test is negative, great.
They can end isolation and wear a mask indoors, at home, and in public.
But still wait 48 hours and take another one to be sure.
And if they have 2 consecutive negative tests, they can stop wearing a mask.
And these are the rapid tests we're talking about that you can just take at home. You can get your 8 free ones a month or whatever. There was also speculation that the CDC might be easing guidance for schools where kids are testing all the time. Did they touch on that at all yesterday?
Yeah, there was one other thing that also caught people's eyes, and it's about this idea of test to stay. It's been a strategy in schools to keep kids in class, not have them miss so much school as we've seen throughout the pandemic.
I worry about just, the other kids and, hand hygiene, sanitizer,
I feel safe. The question they were asking me this morning, and he chooses to wear it. She doesn't really like to wear it.
I heard COVID is getting worse, so I would like to wear a mask.
If a student is exposed to COVID, they don't have to go home and quarantine. They can stay in school so long as they keep testing negative pretty frequently, maybe daily or every other day. And this kind of goes along with that same big picture idea of letting things get back to normal where they can. They're also not recommending large-scale screening like random testing or temperature checks and they're no longer putting an emphasis on 6 feet of social distance. Now it's going to be more of a focus on ventilation, masking, and that also will affect kids in schools.
But Cheyenne, it's not like we're seeing like a lot of schools institute big, wide sweeping mask mandates still. So all these sort of simplifications we're hearing from the CDC would suggest things are getting better in regard to COVID, right? But like I'm looking at these graphs, I'm seeing a lot of cases. I'm seeing a lot of deaths still. Are things, in fact, getting better?
Yeah, we'll definitely see some reaction from the scientific community saying that they would like to see a plan in place for CDC if things get significantly worse. We are right now in a place where hospitalizations and case rates are beginning to fall, but unfortunately, deaths related to COVID are still at a pretty high level. On average, nearly 400 deaths are reported each day over the last 7 days. So that is still really tragically high, and that is something that we still have to focus on.
And the sort of push and pull continues between sort of what we know about how the virus works and how it spreads and how communities are responding to it and what they need to be told. Cheyenne Hazlitt, covering the pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
All right, one more quick break. When we come back, this land is your land, but you might not want everyone else to find it. One Last Thing is next.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
My wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
What happens when Anna Nicole Smith's family goes in search of her secrets, past, and possessions? The new 2020 event tonight on ABC.
And one last thing. When you think of a national park, you probably think of peaceful elk at Yellowstone, sunlight glimmering off of Half Dome. You might not think of a chunk of land sitting on the state line between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. A busy highway marks the edge of this huge expanse called the Delaware Water Gap. And some believe that should be America's next great national park.
This is the one place where you can sit on your porch on Sunday morning and watch deer and turkey and bear in your backyard and get in your car and 90 minutes later be at the Metropolitan Museum of Art or in the Philadelphia Fine Arts Museum.
Meet John Donahue. He's an environmental consultant and a retired employee of the National Park Service.
I live within a mile or two of the boundary of the park.
And he says the Delaware Water Gap is special. Not just because the river is pretty, but because it's a huge rural stretch in a part of the country with no other national parks in sight.
You would have to drive 12 hours to Acadia, or 7 or 8 hours down to Shenandoah, or go out to Ohio.
Here, he says, 60 million people between New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all live within a day's drive. It's currently designated as a national recreation area, but he wants that status updated. Because whether you've heard of it or not, he says, people love this place.
It's also always been one of the top 10 visited parks. At least 4.1 million counted normally.
So who wouldn't want to see this hidden gem get an upgrade?
What do you want to know? I'm tired and cranky. Go ahead.
This is Sandy Hull. Like John, she also lives right nearby, but she's one of the many people who would like you to keep the words national park out of your mouth. Thank you very much.
They also talk about bringing up 1 million more visitors over the next 10 years. There is no way that increased visitation will not have a negative impact on this area. You're talking more traffic.
You've heard of the phrase, not in my backyard, NIMBY. You know, people who want more homeless shelters in the world, but not near them. Well, in an era of heightened environmental protection, of ecotourism, you could call this nature NIMBYism. And these two advocates, John and Sandy, have been going back and forth for months. He says it's one of the most visited parks in the region. She says, nice try, you're counting all the cars that pass through on the highway.
7,200 cars average a day. Those cars are counted as visitors to the recreation area. These people are not visitors, they're going to do their job.
Sandy says national parks bring in more visitors, which would hurt the environment. John says that doesn't even make sense.
Well, that's a bizarre interpretation of what is the highest level of protection and conservation available in the United States of America.
At its heart, this is a question of funding. Whatever the true number of visitors is, this park's got a lot of them. It's growing less and less sustainable. John says a national park designation would create more demand and more funding. Sandy says, look around. It's not getting enough federal funds now. You think that'll magically change once thousands of extra cars show up? No, it'll be a bigger nightmare.
Those are really personal concerns from a handful of people.
I have 3,500 people on Facebook saying, we oppose this proposal. Mr. Donahue has his Mr. Donahue and a couple of guys in the Sierra Club.
Between the Snipes, they also differ on how private business development will help or hurt the area. They each think the other will mess up the area's rich traditions for indigenous tribes. But these two can agree on one thing. They really love the Delaware Water Gap.
The Delaware Water Gap is majestic. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful.
We found shards of pottery there at Turtle Beach that demonstrated that essentially people had lived there for a couple of thousand years longer than anybody had believed earlier.
I honestly don't know where I would fall on this debate because I do know this is always a tougher call when it's right in your own backyard. Something really cool I want to tell you about. ABC Audio just won a bunch of the most prestigious awards in the game. Our friends at ABC Radio won the Edward R. Murrow Award for Best Breaking News Coverage, along with Hard News, Continuing Coverage, and guess what? Start Here, this podcast, won 2 Murrows. Excellence in Sound for our coverage of the long-track tornado that devastated Kentucky last year, and the series Accountable, hosted by Mary Bruce, Rachel Scott, and Mary Alice Parks. They won Best News Series. Just a huge shout-out to the team that worked on that, including Liz Alessi, Kelly Therese, Madeline Wood, Shannon Crawford, Lauren Lantry, Sarah Kolonovsky, and Cheyenne Hazlett, who you just heard from today, right? Like, these are busy people. They're the best in the business. Big thank you to our team. Start Here is produced by Kelly Therese, Jen Newman, Brenda Salinas Baker, Louis Millman, Madeline Wood, Vika Aronson, Iru Ekpanobi, and Tara Gimbel. Ariel Chester is our social media producer. Josh Cohan is director of podcast programming. I'm our managing editor. Liz Alessi is the head of ABC Audio. Thanks to Lakia Brown, John Newman, and our intern, Ania McLean. Special thanks this week to Eric Strauss, Chris Berry, Frankie Perez, Kevin Ryder, and Chris Baccia. I'm Brad Milkey. See you next week.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.